Stories now. Government's had its hands full defending at least 90 legal challenges of the lockdown. Cooperative Governance Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma told the National Council of Provinces today that many of the challenges have been settled out of court. She has again had to defend lockdown decisions during a debate on government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So for more on this, we're joined by ENCA's Lindsay Detlinger. Lindsay, so what has the minister's response been to the legal challenges government is actually facing?
Good evening, Faith. Well, we know about the challenges that big court cases already before the courts. Of course, government already has a case that they've lost in terms of regulations being declared unconstitutional, and which government's appealing. But the minister also revealing that there are far more cases than what we know of the big ones that are in court. She didn't go into too much detail about the kinds of cases that were being faced, saying only that some had been settled out of court, but she made the point that it was really the opposite end of the spectrum. While we have cases with people claiming that the law that has been used to declare this lockdown being incorrect, that banning cigarettes and alcohol unconstitutional. On the other hand, she says there are also challenges saying government has moved too fast in easing the lockdown, and we know that there are challenges regarding, for example, children going back to school. So she called it an interesting balance of the kinds of cases that government is facing, but didn't go into any details in relation to those cases. And as I said, we know some of those are still before the courts.
Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic now, Lindsay. Health MECs from some of the provinces also participating in the debate. How prepared do they say they are for this peak in the pandemic?
Well, Faith, interesting enough today, we heard from some of the health MECs that we don't ordinarily hear too much about because they represent provinces that aren't at this current time facing the strength of the pandemic like we experience, for example, here in the Western Cape or in Gauteng or the Eastern Cape. But concerns raised, for example, by the MECs for health from the Northwest and Limpopo, saying that as industry is being opened up, and in particular in those provinces, the mines returning to full operation, that they're seeing cases increasing. So where they went for days at a time without registering a single case, they're now registering quite a few cases in just a short amount of time. And some of the MECs saying that a lot of the workers, as we know, that work in these mines, they are coming from hotspot provinces to, for example, the Northwest and Limpopo. And so that is really concerning. And the MEC saying it's not as in previous years where many mine workers lived in hostels. They now live within communities in these mining towns. And so the opportunity for community spread is now so much greater because they're interacting with ordinary members of the community as well as with school-going children. So there are concerns about that. And then we also heard from the MEC from the Northern Cape, the province where there was very few cases registered up until recently. And she's saying it's just not true that her province is not testing enough and therefore the numbers are low. And she sought to convince the NCOP that they'd ramped up their testing considerably in recent weeks, and that they're making the necessary preparations to deal with the surging cases as the peak of the pandemic expected in the coming weeks.
And also we've got the South African Local Government Association also expressing concerns about municipalities' capabilities to actually respond to this pandemic.
Correct, Faith. We know that government has set aside 20 billion rand to help local government to respond to the pandemic. But the South African Local Government Association saying, in a way, it's creating expectation. And the representative used the example of water tankers being sent to communities because she said the truth of the matter is we know that these municipalities are so cash-strapped in ordinary time. And so how will they be able to continue providing services that are now being sped up and pushed into these communities? Municipalities just won't cope. They're also dealing with the fact, and the minister also pointed to this, that they're not collecting the kind of revenue that they should because, as we know, many people not working and unable to pay for their services. So the Local Government Association very concerned about how it will continue to provide services that we've seen ramped up in response to this pandemic when the the funds run out and when people are no longer paying and municipalities just simply can't afford to continue with those services that they are now receiving in response to this pandemic.
Thanks so much, Lindsay Detlinger. We'll leave it there for this evening.